Imagine this. You're driving home after a long day, not breaking any laws, when suddenly red and blue lights flash in your mirror. An officer pulls you over, but instead of professionalism, he sneers at you, mocking the car you drive, questioning if you even belong there. He treats you like a criminal, not knowing that you're actually the one person he should have feared the most. Because you're not just any driver. You're the head of internal affairs, the man who investigates cops like him. What happens next will leave him speechless and change his career forever. "Step out of the car!" The voice was sharp, demanding, and laced with authority. Marcus Johnson, a tall, well-dressed black man in his early 40s, had just left his office after a long day. He was heading home in his sleek black sedan, the city lights bouncing off its polished surface. For Marcus, driving was a moment of calm, a chance to unwind before reaching home. But tonight, that calm was shattered the moment flashing red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror. At first, Marcus thought it was just a routine stop, something simple, maybe a traffic light he didn't notice, or a minor speed check. But as soon as Officer Miller approached his window, Marcus immediately sensed that this wasn't routine at all. Something in the officer's body language, his narrowed eyes, the way his hand rested on his holster, it wasn't professional. It was personal. "What are you doing driving a car like this?" Miller sneered, his gaze sweeping over Marcus's luxury sedan as if it was proof of some hidden crime. His tone wasn't one of curiosity, it dripped with disdain. He looked Marcus up and down like a puzzle that didn't fit in his world view. Marcus, calm but firm, handed over his license and registration. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked evenly. But Miller didn't answer the question. Instead, he smirked and leaned closer to the window. "Step out." Now Marcus complied, unbothered on the surface, but his mind was sharp, calculating. He had dealt with officers like Miller before, men who let prejudice guide their badge. As Marcus stepped out, passers-by on the street slowed their pace, curious about the scene unfolding before them. A man in a business suit being pulled from his car for no reason, it didn't sit right, and a small crowd began to form. Miller began circling the vehicle, shining his flashlight inside, rifling through Marcus's glove box and papers without consent. "What's a guy like you doing in a car like this, huh?" he muttered loudly enough for everyone around to hear. "People like you are always hiding something." Marcus kept his composure. He knew better than to escalate. He also knew something Miller didn't. Every single word, every single action was being logged in his memory. And soon, it would matter a lot more than the officer realized. Backup arrived minutes later. 2 more patrol cars pulled up, and officers stepped out. Miller wasted no time painting a false picture. "This guy's being uncooperative," he said, as if setting the stage for an arrest. One of the backup officers immediately placed his hand on his taser, ready to act if Marcus made even the slightest move. Marcus took a slow breath. His voice was steady when he spoke, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I want to make something very clear. I am fully cooperating. I have given my license, registration, and I have followed every order. But I also know my rights." The words should have stopped Miller in his tracks. Instead, he chuckled mockingly. "Yeah? We'll see how much those rights mean when I'm done here." That was it. The line. The one that revealed Miller's arrogance, his confidence that the badge gave him unchecked power. Marcus studied him carefully. This wasn't the first time Miller had done something like this, Marcus could tell. And unless someone stopped him, it wouldn't be the last. Then, in one calm, deliberate motion, Marcus reached into his inner jacket pocket. The officers stiffened, hands moving toward their weapons, but Marcus moved slowly, carefully, his eyes locked on them. "Since you seem so interested in who I am," he said, pulling out a leather badge case, "allow me to introduce myself." He flipped it open, and under the streetlights, the badge gleamed. The words were impossible to miss: Internal Affairs, Division Chief. The crowd gasped. The backup officers froze, eyes widening in disbelief. Miller's smug grin disappeared instantly, his face drained of color as if all the power he thought he held had been ripped away in a second. Marcus's voice cut through the stunned silence, strong, commanding, yet controlled. "You've just racially profiled and unlawfully harassed the person responsible for investigating police misconduct in this entire department." Miller stuttered. I didn't know. I didn't mean—" But Marcus didn't let him finish. "You didn't need to know who I was. The way you treated me tonight is the way you treat people who don't have this badge. That is the problem. That is exactly why officers like you get investigated." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Phones were out, recording. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. It was a moment of accountability unfolding live in front of witnesses. Marcus stood outside his car, calm but firm. The cool night air carried the faint hum of traffic, but all Marcus could hear was the sound of Officer Miller rummaging through his vehicle. The officer didn't bother asking for permission. He simply opened compartments, pulled out papers, and tossed them aside carelessly. "Guys like you are always up to something," Miller muttered under his breath, his flashlight sweeping across the back seat as if it was already filled with contraband. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he refused to take the bait. He didn't resist, didn't raise his voice. His eyes, however, never left Miller. Calm, steady, and observant, he was mentally recording every move, every word, and every violation of his rights. Years of experience had trained him to stay composed, but the sting of being profiled never dulled. Then, the situation escalated. 2 more patrol cars pulled up, sirens briefly wailing before falling silent. The backup officers stepped out, hands already hovering near their holsters, scanning Marcus as though he were dangerous. The flashing red and blue lights painted the scene in tension, drawing more attention from bystanders on the sidewalk. A small crowd began to form, murmurs rising as phones appeared in people's hands, cameras recording. Officer Miller, seizing the moment, turned toward his colleagues. "This guy's being uncooperative," he said confidently, as though spinning a story that would justify what he had already done. His tone carried the authority of someone who had played this game before, someone who knew how to twist a scene in his favor. One of the backup officers shifted uneasily, placing his hand on his taser. His body language was clear. One wrong move from Marcus, and this stop could turn dangerous in an instant. But Marcus wasn't about to give anyone that excuse. His voice cut through the tense silence, calm yet commanding. "I want to make something clear," he said, loud enough for the bystanders and the officers alike. "I am fully cooperating. I have complied with every order, but I also know my rights." His words hung in the air, challenging without aggression, strong without being reckless. The crowd murmured louder, some nodding in support. A few people shouted things like, "Yeah, let him be," and "He's not resisting." But Marcus's statement didn't shake Miller. If anything, it made him more defiant. A smirk crept across his face as he leaned closer, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We'll see how much those rights mean when I'm done here." The words struck like a hammer, chilling in their implication. They weren't the words of a protector of the law. They were the words of someone who believed the badge gave him unchecked power. Miller didn't know it yet, but in that single sentence, he had made the biggest mistake of his career. The crowd reacted instantly. Phones zoomed in, recording every detail. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The arrogance in Miller's voice was undeniable, a raw display of bias and intimidation. Marcus stood taller, refusing to show fear. He had been in situations like this before, but tonight was different. Tonight, This wasn't just about him being harassed. This was about exposing a problem far bigger than one traffic stop. His calm presence only seemed to frustrate Miller more. The officer began circling Marcus now, muttering under his breath, as if trying to provoke him. "You think you're smart, huh? You think you know better than me?" Marcus's eyes didn't waver. He answered evenly, "No. I know the law, and I know when it's being broken." The backup officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them lowered his hand from his taser, clearly unsettled by Miller's behavior. They weren't blind. They could see Marcus wasn't resisting. They could see the crowd recording, and they could hear the dangerous arrogance in their colleague's voice. Still, Miller pressed on, trying to maintain control of the narrative. He turned back to the crowd and raised his voice. "This man is refusing to comply. He's obstructing." But before he could finish his sentence, Marcus calmly reached into his inner jacket pocket. The move was slow, deliberate, his other hand raised in plain sight, so there would be no excuse for sudden movement. "Since you're so concerned about who I am," Marcus said, his voice steady but laced with authority, "perhaps it's time I show you." Every eye was on him. The backup officers tensed, the crowd leaned forward, phones recording every second. Marcus pulled out a leather badge case, flipping it open under the glow of the flashing lights. The gold emblem gleamed, unmistakable, undeniable. The words engraved beneath it silenced the street. Internal Affairs, Division Chief. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The backup officers froze, their expressions shifting instantly from suspicion to shock. The murmurs in the crowd erupted into gasps and exclamations, and Officer Miller, the once arrogant, smirking face of authority, went pale. His eyes darted from the badge to Marcus, disbelief spreading across his features. Marcus's voice carried power now, resonating not just with the officers, but with every single witness standing nearby. "You've just racially profiled and unlawfully harassed the man responsible for investigating misconduct in this entire department." The crowd roared in reaction, phones capturing every angle, every word. Miller's arrogance evaporated, replaced with panic. He stuttered, I didn't know. I didn't mean..." But Marcus didn't let him finish. His gaze was unshakable as he spoke. "You didn't need to know who I was. The way you treated me tonight is the way you treat people who don't have this badge. That is the problem. And tonight, the whole world will see it." And with those words, the balance of power shifted. Miller wasn't in control anymore. His career, his reputation, everything he thought untouchable, it was crumbling, right there on the side of the road. As the crowd around grew larger, Marcus reached into his inner jacket pocket slowly and carefully. Every move was deliberate. His free hand remained raised where everyone could see it, clear, calm, and non-threatening. The backup officers stiffened, their fingers brushing their weapons, unsure of what he was about to do. The bystanders, phones in hand, held their breath. "Since you seem so interested in who I am," Marcus said, his voice low but commanding. With a steady motion, he pulled out a leather case and flipped it open. Under the harsh glow of the flashing patrol lights, the metal gleamed bright and unmistakable. "Internal Affairs, Division Chief." The crowd gasped as if the words themselves carried weight. The backup officers froze in place, suspicion drained from their faces, replaced by disbelief. And Officer Miller, the man who had been so smug just seconds ago, looked as though the ground beneath him had given way. His grin vanished instantly. His lips parted, but no words came out. His face turned pale, beads of sweat forming on his brow. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority was in every syllable, every calm breath. "You've just racially profiled and unlawfully harassed the person responsible for investigating police misconduct in this entire department." The silence that followed was crushing. Even the noise of traffic seemed to fade away. The only sound was the clicking of phone cameras and the hushed whispers of the growing crowd. The two backup officers shifted uncomfortably. Their body language changed instantly, no longer tense, no longer seeing Marcus as a threat. Instead, they took small steps back, suddenly unsure of their positions. They glanced at Miller, who only moments ago had commanded the scene with arrogance, but now looked powerless and exposed. Miller's hands trembled. His voice cracked as he tried to salvage the moment. I didn't know. I didn't mean... But Marcus's sharp gaze stopped him cold. He wasn't about to let him wriggle free with excuses. You didn't need to know who I was, officer. That's the point. Marcus's tone was controlled, each word precise. He turned slightly so that the crowd and cameras could hear him clearly. The way you treated me tonight is the way you treat people who don't have this badge. And that is exactly the problem. Gasps and nods rippled through the onlookers. Some muttered, "That's right." Others shook their heads in disbelief. The scene, once controlled by Miller's aggression, now belonged entirely to Marcus. Miller opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. His confidence had evaporated. The smugness, the authority, the arrogance, it all crumbled in the face of the truth. He was exposed. Marcus stepped forward, closing the gap between them, though his movements were calm and deliberate. "You think this badge gives you power," he said, holding up his own credentials for all to see. "But all it does is hold you accountable to the very laws you swore to uphold." The backup officers lowered their heads, avoiding Marcus's eyes. They knew the fallout this scene would cause. They knew the body cameras, the crowd's phones, and Marcus's own testimony would become evidence that could not be ignored. For Miller, there was no escape. His earlier words, "Guys like you are always up to something, and we'll see how much your rights mean," hung heavy in the air. The crowd hadn't forgotten. The cameras hadn't stopped rolling, and Marcus wasn't about to let them fade into the night. He turned once more to the people gathered. "This isn't about one man being mistreated," he declared. "It's about a system that allows bias to dictate justice. Tonight, you all saw it for yourselves, and it stops here." The reaction was immediate. Applause broke out from the crowd. Some cheered, others shouted words of encouragement. Phones stayed high, capturing every second of the downfall of a once arrogant officer. Miller looked as though he wanted to melt into the pavement. His authority was gone, stripped away not by force, but by truth. He stammered weakly, "Please, let me explain." But Marcus didn't budge. He tucked his badge back into his pocket and spoke the final words that sealed the moment. "You will explain, but not to me. You'll explain to Internal Affairs, my office. First thing tomorrow morning?" The crowd erupted again, this time louder. Miller's career, once untouchable in his own eyes, was hanging by a thread, and everyone watching knew it. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't smile or smirk. He simply walked back to his car, his posture tall, his expression resolute. The point had been made. The abuse of power had been exposed, and justice was already in motion. Because for Marcus Johnson, this wasn't just about one traffic stop. It was about showing that no matter who you are or what badge you wear, the law applies to everyone. The next day, Marcus wasted no time. As the sun rose over the city, he was already in his office, drafting the report that would change everything. Every detail of the stop was carefully documented. The flashing lights, the mocking tone, the unlawful search, the false claims of non-compliance. He had replayed the entire night in his mind, making sure nothing was missed. But Marcus knew that his word alone wasn't enough. Fortunately, the evidence was on his side. The body camera footage, meant to protect officers from false accusations, instead sealed Miller's fate. The video showed everything: the aggressive stop, the baseless search, the demeaning comments. It even captured the chilling line that had hung in Marcus's mind all night. "We'll see how much those rights mean when I'm done here." With the footage and Marcus's report in hand, the department had no choice. Officer Miller was immediately placed on suspension pending investigation. The man who just 24 hours earlier had been smirking with arrogance was now sitting at home, his career dangling by a thread. But for Marcus, suspension wasn't enough. This wasn't just about Miller. This was about the uniform, the badge, and the culture that allowed behavior like his to thrive. 2 days later, Marcus stood at the front of the department's largest conference room. Rows of uniformed officers filled the seats, men and women of every rank, from rookies fresh out of the academy to seasoned veterans with decades of service. The air was heavy with tension. Many of them had already seen the viral footage circulating online. They knew why they were here. Marcus stood tall, his voice steady as he began. "If you wear this badge, you represent the law. The moment you let prejudice guide your actions, you're not protecting the community. You're harming it." The room was silent. Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared at the floor. Marcus let the words sink in before continuing. "Last night wasn't about one officer making a mistake," he said firmly. "It was about a culture that allows bias to slip through the cracks. And that ends now." He didn't mince words. He outlined a plan for sweeping changes: mandatory anti-bias training, quarterly evaluations on officer conduct, and harsher penalties for those caught profiling citizens. No more slaps on the wrist, no more excuses. If you abused the badge, you would answer for it. "Accountability is not optional," Marcus declared. "It is the foundation of trust. Without it, this department has nothing." The officers listened, some nodding in agreement, others visibly bristling at the call for reform. But Marcus didn't care about being popular. He cared about being effective. What happened next surprised even him. Word of the meeting, combined with the viral video, spread beyond the department walls. Local news outlets picked up the story. Headlines ran with phrases like "Internal Affairs, Chief Exposes Racist Cop," and "Police Misconduct Confronted from Within." Clips of the traffic stop flooded social media. The sight of Marcus calmly revealing his badge while Miller's arrogance crumbled became a symbol of accountability. In coffee shops, barber shops, and classrooms, people were talking about it. Parents told their kids that justice could still be served. Community leaders praised Marcus for not just standing up for himself, but for standing up for everyone who had been silenced before. Even city officials weighed in. The mayor released a statement commending Marcus's bravery and vowing to support reforms. For the first time in a long time, people felt hopeful that change was possible. But Marcus remained humble. When reporters asked him why he stayed so calm during the stop, his answer was simple: "Because if I lost control, the truth would have been buried." Staying calm exposed it. The praise poured in, but Marcus kept the focus where it belonged: on accountability. He reminded the public and the department alike that this wasn't about him being a hero. It was about making sure no citizen, regardless of race, wealth, or background, was ever treated as less than human again. Behind closed doors, not everyone was happy. Some officers resented the scrutiny. Some argued that Marcus was making the department look bad. But Marcus didn't flinch. "The department doesn't look bad because we exposed the problem," he said in one heated meeting. "It looks bad because the problem exists. Hiding it won't fix it. Facing it will." The viral story became a turning point. For every critic, there were 10 voices cheering him on. For every officer resistant to change, there were those quietly thankful that someone finally demanded higher standards. Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Reform never was. But he also knew that the events of that night, the flashing lights, the unlawful stop, the smug grin wiped away by a badge, had created momentum, and momentum was powerful. As the weeks passed, Miller's case moved forward. The evidence was overwhelming. The department, under intense public pressure, couldn't sweep it under the rug. Miller's suspension turned into formal charges of misconduct. His badge, once a shield for arrogance, now served as a reminder of accountability. For Marcus, it was never about revenge. It was about responsibility. "We can't control who wears this badge in the past," he said in one televised interview. "But we can control what it means in the future." And with that, Marcus Johnson became more than the head of internal affairs. He became a symbol of justice within the system, proving that sometimes the most powerful act of defiance is staying calm, speaking the truth, and demanding change when it matters most. Weeks later, Officer Miller sat in a small, crowded hearing room. His uniform, once worn with arrogance, now felt heavy on his shoulders. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. But there was none. The room was filled with stern faces, officials from the department, lawyers, community representatives, and citizens who had followed the story from the start. The evidence against him was overwhelming: body camera footage, eyewitness testimonies, and of course, Marcus Johnson's own detailed report. For the first time in his career, Miller wasn't the one holding power. He was the one being judged. His career, once defined by unchecked authority and intimidation, was now crumbling before his very eyes. Every smirk, every arrogant word he had spoken on that night played back against him like a damning echo. He had spent years treating people as if their rights were optional, but now his own rights were being read back to him in the stark language of accountability. Meanwhile, Marcus was far from the shadows of that incident. He had stepped fully into the public eye, though not because he sought attention. His calm composure during the stop and his unwavering commitment afterward had turned him into something bigger than just the head of internal affairs. To the community, Marcus had become a symbol of justice within the very system that often failed them. He gave speeches at schools, community centers, and even at officer training academies. He reminded everyone that authority means nothing without integrity. "The badge doesn't make you powerful," he told a group of young cadets one afternoon. "It makes you responsible. The moment you forget that, you stop serving the people and start serving yourself." The community embraced him. Parents brought their children to hear him speak, telling them, "This is what real leadership looks like." Young people who had grown up distrusting the police found hope in his words. Even some officers who had once bristled at his reforms now respected him for his honesty and consistency. The message spread far beyond his department. News outlets across the country replayed the footage of the stop and Marcus's unforgettable reveal. Social media buzzed with support, the clip shared millions of times. People who had never met Marcus felt connected to his story because it spoke to something universal: the demand for fairness, dignity, and respect. And while many celebrated Marcus, others began reflecting on their own behavior. Officers in departments across the city started paying closer attention to how they approached citizens. Supervisors began discussing reforms with more urgency. Change was no longer just a conversation, it was becoming a movement. As for Officer Miller, his downfall was swift. His suspension became a termination. His name, once barely known outside his precinct, became synonymous with what happens when prejudice collides with accountability. At the hearing, he tried to apologize, tried to explain that he had been under stress and didn't mean it that way. But no excuse could erase the footage. No words could undo the arrogance etched in his smirk when he thought Marcus was powerless. The irony was heavy. For years, Miller had judged others, writing reports that decided their fate. But now, judgment had come for him, and it was final. His career in law enforcement was over. Marcus, however, didn't celebrate his downfall. He never saw this as a victory over one man. To him, it was proof of something greater, that the system could hold itself accountable if people were willing to demand it. At a public forum weeks later, he summarized the lesson in words that echoed across the room. Respect and equality aren't privileges. They are rights. And anyone who abuses power to strip others of those rights will eventually face consequences. The applause that followed wasn't just for Marcus. It was for the truth he carried, a truth people had waited too long to hear. In the end, Marcus hadn't just stopped a racist officer. He had sparked a conversation, one that resonated in precincts, classrooms, living rooms, and city halls. A conversation that reminded both the public and the police that accountability doesn't discriminate. It applies to everyone, whether you're a citizen walking down the street or an officer wearing a badge. And in every speech Marcus gave afterward, he closed with the same line. A line that became his signature, a reminder carved into the hearts of everyone who heard it. The badge doesn't make you above the law. It makes you more responsible to it. The words lingered long after the applause ended, echoing across the city as both a warning and a promise that justice, no matter how delayed, always finds its way.